Welcome, everyone, to the Finding Elevation podcast. So glad you're here on the summer of 2026. I am excited to talk to my guest today, who is a mountain guide for Mountain Madness. I think it's important that we sort of get a guide's perspective on preparation and what makes a successful climb and a successful trip in the mountains. So Sean is going to walk us through some of his tips and tricks and do's and don'ts and observations. He is a mountain guide, as I said, and an outdoor educator. He lives here in Seattle, and he's worked professionally in the outdoors for almost 20 years. He has a master's degree in recreation. How fun is that? And in addition to guiding for Mountain Madness, he's also the program director for a really cool organization called Youth Experiential Training Institute, YETI for short, which is a small nonprofit here in Seattle that provides free outdoor programs for public schools and students in South King County. Awesome. Welcome, Sean. Glad to chat with you today. So tell us a little bit more about how you got where you are. How did you wind up as a mountain guide?
Yeah. As a kid, I always enjoyed going outside. My parents, took me out a lot. And I was in the middle of Central Texas and Austin, Texas, where I grew up. And so it wasn't always like super fun for me as a kid, or I didn't really appreciate it. But I like to tell everyone that, when you take your kids outside, it's really an investment. It pays off later. My dad was a rock climber and he got me into climbing. I joined the climbing team when I was in middle school. And then I just kind of played a bunch of like traditional sports through high school and college. And, when you kind of start to find yourself and figure out who you are and you start thinking about your identity.
Still doing that. I don't know what you're talking about.
In that phase, it was when it really like dawned on me that spending time outside was something that was really important to me. That kind of naturally led to sharing it with others, working at summer camps, doing like, outdoor ed kind of programs and climbing, schools and things like that. Yeah. And eventually just started looking for jobs in the outdoor industry and kind of wanted to move on, as it often happens, to bigger things and try to challenge myself, and found myself, in Seattle and working for Mountain Madness, guiding people because we have some of the best mountains in the lower 48.
We sure do. Yeah. At what point did you decide that you wanted to work with kids as well? And like, when did it click for you that outdoor and education could be combined?
Yeah, I mean, it happened like pretty naturally. I was a music teacher at this like small music school in high school. It's kind of like an after school job, and I liked working with youth. And then my dad's friend, who like had this sort of guide service / outdoor ed organization, saw me working with young people and knew I was like a climber and and outdoorsy stuff like that. And he was like, oh, well, why don't you come work for me? And I was like, oh yeah, sure. And I had already done some like summer camp like stuff where we take kids like biking and climbing. And so that's probably where I really started to develop a passion for like education and like sharing the outdoors with people. And definitely not by any real designs or plans. It sort of just happened, but I'm glad that it did. And it, has kind of led me down this path of spending more time outside and sharing the outdoors in the mountains with people.
Yeah. And I think for kids, it's so important. I often wonder, like, if I had been introduced to the mountains when I was 10 years old instead of when I was 28 years old, like I'm very happy with where I ended up, but you just wonder how differently the younger part of my life would have been if the outdoors were a big part of it.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think we're also like finding more and more the like mental health benefits of spending time outside. There's studies that even like spending 10 minutes like walking through the woods will like lower blood pressure, reduce anxiety, things like that. And I think that's just like such an important thing to show young people, is that there is like sort of this healthy outlet, this healthy coping mechanism for any kind of anxiety or issues you might be going through in your life. So yeah, it's super important, I think.
And it occurs to me too that both of your jobs involve like helping people achieve goals or learn things or find themselves. And I would imagine that's incredibly rewarding to you. Like, are there some sort of standout moments where you really saw, I would imagine in the youth space there are, right? Kids who've maybe never been outside and they just have this, tell me about those experiences.
Yeah, that's very right. And like outdoor ed and then like technical mountain guiding can be like very different jobs and different practices. but the rewards are pretty similar. I think like, especially like with the youth we work with a lot of the time, there's a lot of barriers to like accessing some of the like beautiful, public lands that we have here in the state. And so like, I think I was showing people this video of a kid that I took out. He was from the Congo and lived in France, and then he was here. And I took all of these kids out to this like waterfall, Franklin Falls, which is,
and he was what, like 11 or 12?
Yeah, he's 12-year-old. And all these students were like part of the English language learning program. So they were all immigrants to the country, or at least learning the language. So like they already experienced a lot of barriers just like navigating life in the US, And so, it was really cool to like take them out to this waterfall, and like immediately the second they saw it, it's like phones were out and they were like taking pictures. This one girl was just like standing in front of the waterfall as it just like blasted mist at her. And the whole time she wasn't like, the whole day I didn't even know if she was like enjoying herself. I didn't know what was going on. She had like a mask on and was just like quiet, but she just stood there for a solid 10 minutes as the like water blasted her. And, it was just cool to see like the joy on their face that like, they don't get to go out and see things like that, even though it's just like an hour drive from their house. But that's because there's a lot of barriers to people getting out and spending time outside. So showing them that it's like accessible, it's something they can do. And like my favorite thing ever is when a kid says, "What is the name of this place? I need to tell my parents so that we can come back here." And It's like, yeah, that's exactly what we're looking for. It's like a kid go home and say, "Mom, Dad, like you got to go to Franklin Falls. We got to go as a family." So yeah, that's great. And then like in the mountain guiding world, like people, summits are really cool. So people have a good time when they're on top. But I mean, people travel from all over to see like glaciated peaks. I mean, just this last weekend, I was on Mount Baker with a father and son from Kentucky. Mm-hmm. And they had read your book, and that's how they heard about Mountain Madness. Yeah. And it was just so fun to see like their minds get blown looking at Mount Baker. I think they must have said a bunch of times like, "Man, I always imagined it would be like this, but I didn't know it was going to really be like this."
Yeah.
And yeah, just seeing them on like a glacier for the first time, standing on the summit of Baker, it's just like, yeah, it's just very cool to be a part of that like moment in people's lives, because I know they're so important to me. And so I get to kind of like share it over and over again, And
I feel like we all, as you're talking, like we all can create that for people, right? We probably all know someone or have someone in our lives that hasn't experienced nature or wants to, but there, as you said, are barriers, or they're hesitant, or they don't know where to go. Just thinking like, I should just take a friend out for an easy hike one day.
Yeah.
Who like doesn't normally do that, just to like continue to share and let that sort of ripple through our communities, because it's so powerful.
And you might find that it actually like stokes your joy for the outdoors. Yes. I think that's like the biggest thing is, sometimes I take it for granted, when you're like guiding out there all summer and you're thinking about how busy your schedule is and getting tired and that type of stuff. But then like you get to see it again through new eyes, and it kind of builds your own stoke for your own kind of missions and visions. So
it really does. Yeah, it really does. You've been guiding for how many years?
So since I think my first like kind of outdoor ed guide job was when I was 19. Let's see, I'm 37 now, so 18 years.
18 years, yeah.
Yeah, something like that.
So give us an idea of what's like the summer life of a mountain guide in the Pacific Northwest.
Well, yeah, at least at Madness, the summer guide season is the busiest one. And especially in the Northwest, we have maybe 2.5 months of good weather a year.
Seems like it's getting shorter and shorter, but yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So people are trying to get out as much as they can. And that's when the mountains really are the best. And the weather's incredible. We get such an incredible snowpack throughout the winter that like all kinds of terrain is available to you. So like rock, snow, ice, everything you could want, like in an alpine experience, you can probably find it in the Northwest. So that's why people, really get after it. And that's why there's so many guide services, honestly, up here. So the season is, at least the way I try to schedule it, because I think that I figured it out, obviously. The season typically looks like, your snow, volcano, big mountain climbing, right? Until probably about mid-July. That's just when the snow is really well filled in. Those routes are really straightforward. There's not, even a lot of the rock stuff is not exposed yet because there's so much snow July. And so I kind of call it like snow cone climbing season because it's just all the volcanoes look like snow cones. You can, of course, climb those routes later in the season, but you might run into like crevasses that shut the route down, or the route might get a lot longer, or you encounter funkiness. So like I've climbed Mount Baker in September, it's fine and it went, and that's great. But I kind of consider the like prime season to be right until like basically July, mid-July probably. And then in July, that's when you really start getting these like kind of cool rock routes being fully in condition. So, you might start your day on the trail, cross a snowfield or a small glacier, end up on a rock ridge, like coming out of the glacier for 1,000 feet and then going back down. Like I think about the West Ridge of Forbidden is kind of one of the thick ones. And then Mount Shuxon is another one that has some rock to it with some glaciation. And later in the season, it gets pretty cool because some of those steep snow slopes actually turn into pretty good ice. So, you're on one mountain on the Fisher Chimneys, you're going to climb snow, glacier, rock, and ice all in the same summit trip. Yeah, that's just a really cool experience. And then, later in the season, I try to end up doing a lot more of just the pure rock climbing. So you're probably like hiking a dirt trail up to a rock objective, something like at Washington Pass. And I actually went into the Twin Sisters range 2 years ago. And that was a pretty fun one to do after a lot of the snow had melted.
So let's talk about, I love for this podcast to be educational and beneficial for people. And I think as mountain guides, you have seen everything. So, and part of my intention with this podcast also is to just raise our collective awareness and education and skill. So what are some things that you as a guide, don't recommend us doing or wish clients knew or had thought about differently before they stepped onto a glacier?
Yeah, definitely. I think the biggest don't would probably be don't psych yourself out. And I think a big part of that is don't get attached to outcomes that you think are going to happen, right? So, I think a lot of times people stress about and imagine what it's going to be like, and they even get attached to what they think is going to be hard or what they think is going to be fun or what they think is going to be beautiful. And if you go in with too many expectations that way, you're not really going to be able to receive the experience as it's happening, right? And
can we just pause? That is so huge, Sean. And I love that that's your first thing. It's not like a piece of gear or training. It's just take it as it comes and be open to that experience. Because when you're stuck in your head or worrying or attached to an outcome, you're missing this amazing stuff that's going on all around.
And I'd say for the first mountain, people are just nervous. And that's the biggest thing I see. And a lot of times that's what we're kind of combating. I like to joke with people sometimes where I'm like, you just got to trick yourself, if you're tossing and turning before summit day and you're I didn't get any sleep, just tell yourself, man, I had a nice nap, and if you think oh, it's going to be cold in the morning, you can be actually, it's kind of balmy out. This is nice, and and so there's just all these ways that we can kind of trick ourselves into being successful, I think, one of my biggest ones. And then anything you can do to kind of help that mind state before is always great. So I tell people just try out your gear before you step on the mountain, right? Go for a hike in your boots, pack your backpack and adjust it and feel it, go for a hike. When you're trying something new, task saturation happens really fast, right? So if you're even using a stove for the first time that you've never used before, that's something you have to spend mental energy on and think about.
Totally nerve-wracking because you think you're going to blow it up and burn your tent down.
Yeah.
Totally felt that.
Yeah. So any of those things you can do ahead of time that you can just take off the list of new or learning, it just gives you more bandwidth and mental energy to focus on the things that you can't practice at home, maybe crampon technique, ice axe technique, self-arrest, stuff like that.
Yep. Yeah, those are really good ones. And obviously the mindset piece, I think, is so important. So I love hearing you talk about that. Okay, so the opposite question, what are some things that when you see this, you're oh, this person's dialed, they're on it?
Yeah, we're going to get superficial with this one. So you're deep.
Let's
with
do it.
Yeah, it's if you've got stuff dangling from your pack, really, it's literally you can tell the way someone packs their pack, if they're going to be dialed or not,
Yes.
If it's tight, it's organized, they know where things are. Yeah, there's just something about that you can just tell, okay, this person knows what's happening, And so like taking the time to pack a pack and learning how to do it right is like probably the number one signal you can send to everybody that like, hey, I got it going on, you know.
That's a good one. And I was reminded by the little kid in the cartoon movie Up when I think
Mhm.
about stuff dangling. Remember that little kid was like walking around and like had his cup and his bowl and who knows what
Yeah.
else, like just flopping off of his
Yeah.
backpack. Yeah. Don't be the Up kid. So what are some things that you like in terms of packing? What are your tips or what do you
Yeah.
do in order to keep your kit really dialed?
Yeah. I mean, I think that there's a lot of experimentation that kind of happens all the time. So, any technique you learn or any piece of gear you like, you're always like learning and evolving. But I tell people with packing a pack, there's like three things to think about. And it's like one, weight. So you want your weight kind of in the middle to the bottom of the pack, but really you just don't want it, you want it well secured. You don't want it rattling around, But then like water is the most heavy thing we carry, but we can't put our water in the bottom of our pack. So you have to balance that with accessibility. So thinking about the things you need. A lot of times in mountaineering, like there's stuff that you're not going to use until you get to camp, right? So it's like bury it in the bottom of the pack. Don't worry about it. And then the last thing is like packability. So like if something's rigid like a pot or a stove, like you're not able to like shove that into different spaces. So you'll like put something like that in and then take something like a jacket, rainfly, tent, something like that and stuff it around that thing and then just go in layers like that in your pack. Because what you're doing is you're securing all the weight in the right places. So it's not going to like kind of throw you off balance, but you're also making sure that you're not like having to unpack your entire pack every time you stop because you want a snack or a drink of water or anything like that.
Right.
Yeah, those are like the main kind of things I think about when we're packing.
And I'm guessing we talked about this a little bit when we were prepping. So stuff sacks versus no stuff sack. Which camp are you in and why?
I am a no stuff sack guy.
No stuff sacker.
No. Yeah, maybe it just says something about your personality if you're that way. But I just think a stuff sack basically takes something that's really packable and turns it into a rigid object that isn't packable. And so I just think you're working against yourself if you're putting things in stuff sacks. I know plenty of guides who would disagree with me, though.
I do think it's personal preference. I feel like people are solidly in one camp or the other camp.
Yeah.
And I have learned to be a no stuff sacker. I like things very tidy and organized. So when I started climbing, I wanted everything. I wanted like all my clean clothes in a stuff sack and my dirty clothes in a different and my insulated stuff. And what I found is that by letting it all be free in my backpack, I can my backpack can be smaller. I can take a smaller backpack, so less weight. And just shove all that stuff in every little tiny nook and cranny.
Yes. I think I've seen that so often when people start mountaineering. It's like they want a stuff sack for everything, But like we got like one rule that's a constant in mountaineering, and it's like whatever size bag you bring, you're going to fill it, And I feel like if
women's purse.
Yeah.
Same thing.
So if you're bringing just a bunch of little bags, you're probably going to start filling those bags too. And I mean, that's also one of those getting back to the like don'ts. I mean, I think the most common thing that I see is people bring too much, they kind of like they'll have a toiletry kit that's about this big, and like the other day I was like helping someone with their tent at the end of a trip, and I was like, are you wearing deodorant? It's, like things like that people don't like think about, and
it's funny though that most people would be like, would discourage people. Would not. You're like, why are you wearing deodorant? Most of the time the conversation is, dude, you need some deodorant.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, not on the mountain though. Yeah, so things like that, like people just bring a lot and they'll bring like 2 pairs of pants. They imagine that they're going to have time to read like a whole book. And it's like, when we're up there climbing, like there's, not that much downtime or time to do stuff. And, wardrobe changes are not that important unless it's for like function. So I think most commonly, and this like totally applies to me too, is that people eventually learn to bring less and less as they get experienced. And so, then it's like, why do I need a stuff sack? I'm not even bringing that much.
Right. Yeah. And then it becomes like, how little can I get away with?
Yeah.
Right.
That's a fun game to play.
Flip the switch or like, and you're like, could I make this a 30-liter pack for an overnight with glacier gear?
Yeah. And then it's so easy to go on the other side of that, where people are like cutting their toothbrushes in half and all this stuff. And it's like, And at a certain point, you're just like, wait a minute, why am I doing this?
I have cut the tags out of all my clothes. I've cut
Yeah,
shortened the straps on all my backpacks. I've
yeah,
done all
yeah,
the things. And I do think, just to circle back on like clothes and wardrobe changes, like everyone's going to smell no matter what. And so I also think that you don't really smell each other. I don't know. There's something just happens when
definitely.
you're up there and you just don't even notice it. Like your senses are focused on other things, or I
Mhm.
don't know. Like, so just wear the clothes you're going to wear. Maybe bring like one extra shirt to change into, especially if you sweat, so you can let one dry and put the other one on. And like just minimum. The only reason you need to change clothes is to add a layer or take a layer off.
Yeah, exactly. And that's
It,
like the only thing I tell people to like that I'll allow them to go extra on. I'm like underwear and socks.
socks. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like those things, sure, you can, they're light, they're small, you can pack extra. If they're wet or uncomfortable, like it's
Mm-hmm.
going to make your life miserable. So it's
Mm-hmm.
worthwhile to have the extra ones.
Yep.
But everything else is like, you can get away wearing the same pair of pants for, 2 weeks,
Oh
actually.
yeah. I didn't shower for 19 days once when I was on Denali.
Yeah.
I survived,
Yeah.
and I survived. It was fine.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
The other thing that I think people are in different camps about is footwear, and
Yeah.
particularly approach shoes. So if
Yeah.
you're climbing Baker, for example, or Shuxon, do you tend to wear your boots the whole time, or do you bring a different pair of shoes to get to camp and then switch?
No, I think you're right about that. I've been in both camps. When I was younger, I was like, I'm not bringing an extra pair of shoes. I will wear the shoes that I wear. I'll make it work in the terrain that I'm in.
Mm-hmm.
Now that I've gotten older, a few other aches and pains, feet are important, and keeping your feet comfortable is
Yeah.
just like a way to I think it's a way to survive. And now I do footwear changes even though I might not need to,
Mm-hmm.
just because it's like it gives my foot a break to be in a different pair of shoes.
Yep.
So typically for like a glacier climb, I got my full shank boots like on my pack, and I'm hiking in my running shoes, my really comfy
Yeah.
like trail runners. For something like the West Ridge of Forbidden, for instance, I'll wear like a light pair of boots. Like I'll
Mm-hmm.
hike in tennis shoes. I'll wear like a light pair of boots to get up on the climb, and
Mm-hmm.
sometimes I'll switch back into my like light shoes for the actual
For
climbing.
the rock.
Yeah, just because it feels like I could climb it in my boots, and I have, but
Mm-hmm.
it just feels kind of nice to switch the footwear up. Because then by the
Well,
time
I'm
I'm
climbing
done,
Forbidden next month. I might do that. I hadn't actually thought about that.
yeah. Oh, yeah. It actually feels good because it's like the second you get tired of your feet in your approach shoes climbing,
You.
you can put them into boots and you're like, oh, this feels better. And now you're going
Yep.
down in the snow. So, yeah, I've definitely started becoming a multi footwear kind of person.
I'm in the same camp. I have my feet are not always happy, and so it's hard for me to find boots that they really feel good in. So anytime I can minimize the time my feet are in boots, the happier I am.
Definitely.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, let's talk a little bit about progression. This is a question. This is one of my favorite things to actually help people with. And what I see often is that people are maybe avid backpackers. They love being outside. And especially if you live in the Pacific Northwest, you kind of become curious about climbing a bigger
Mhm.
mountain or being on a glacier. And so most people will climb Mount Adams,
Mhm.
which in the Pacific Northwest, which is a 12,000-foot mountain. And it's not glaciated, although it has permanent snow on it. So it lets
Mhm.
people get on some steep snow in non-technical terrain with very little consequence. And then usually after that, people will attempt to climb Mount Baker, which is now a glaciated peak that has some depending on which route you're on, will involve being on a rope team, crossing crevasses, and camping in the snow overnight.
Mhm.
So what do you like if someone does well on Baker, on say the Easton Glacier, what do
Mhm.
you see as progression, or what would you recommend they do after that?
I think those, like a lot of times, the progression kind of applies to whatever people's goals are. Because a lot of people climb Baker as like a stepping stone to then go climb Rainier, which is
Mm-hmm.
Washington's highest mountain, and a step up in kind of
Yep.
technical problems there and glaciation and stuff. And then other people they just think like the five volcanoes in Washington. It's like, hey, that's a great little tick list.
Totally.
And
Yeah.
so Baker might be the first glaciated peak that you get on, but then you've got some others that you can, kind of go tick off. Then there's like folks who are trying to build like their mountain repertoire,
Mm-hmm.
however you say that word.
You got it.
And they're trying to like collect skills, so like
Yeah.
kind of like I was talking about before, where you might have a bunch of different mediums you're climbing in the mountains, trying to get proficient at all of them, right?
Mm.
So like after someone's like climbed a Baker, say the Easton Glacier or the Coleman Deming, it's like, okay, they've got their crevasse rescue probably dialed in. They've figured out glacier travel. And so they
Mm-hmm.
might be looking for something like, okay, I want to try my hand at some alpine rock or some steeper snow or some steeper ice. And in that case, then, I'd typically point people to like maybe going to the north side of Baker and climbing
Yeah.
some of the seracs over there to learn some ice
Super
climbing.
fun.
Yep. Or going somewhere like Washington Pass where there's really accessible alpine rock and they can kind of develop their rock transitions like rappelling,
Mm-hmm.
belaying, cleaning anchors, stuff like that. And then as we're adding those skills, then suddenly other mountains start to become like possible. So like the classic is to go to Mount Shuxon after Baker.
Yeah.
Mount Shuxon has that great glaciated terrain that you cross, but then the 600-foot like rock pyramid at the top.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a couple different routes up there that you can do. So that's one where you're introducing now some like low difficulty rock climbing and rappelling and some of those transitions that you need in order to move on, alpine rock. And then if people really like that, then, like we talked about before, the West Ridge of Forbidden is like a great next step for, instead of having a 600-foot rock section, you're really climbing like a couple thousand feet of
Yeah.
rock at that point. And I'd say those like stepping stones are common for folks who are trying to kind of like build up their skills in the mountain.
And we're fortunate to have, I have to stop and be grateful for a minute for how much access we have to really cool terrain here in Washington.
Yeah.
What about like more obscure, like we have so many mountains here. What are some more obscure ones that you would point people to if they wanted something a little bit different?
So we have this like really remote range here called the Pickets.
Uh-huh.
And I mean, any way you get to the Pickets, it's the difficult, right? It's hard to get there. But if you're back there and you're climbing the Pickets, you will not see another human being just because it's so remote out there. And I'd say that going out there was like really a cool experience.
Mm-hmm.
We were in kind of the northern Pickets and trying to do that traverse there, which is kind of Whatcom, Challenger, and Luna, all those peaks together. And one thing that's like so cool is that you can get a motorboat to drop you off at the trailhead because Ross Lake is like this massive lake right on the border. And so we like get dropped off by this boat and then like hike in. And so you just like feel so far out there. It's a very, very cool experience, especially if you're trying to like step up, seclusion a little bit with your climbing.
Yeah, I love that. Do you have any personal climbs that you're working on or any projects that are on your horizon?
Yeah, I try not to be too specific with my projects because, I don't like to attach myself to outcomes. But yeah, I've got, each year I try to spend some time in the spring up in Alaska. And there's a few routes there that I've kind of had my eye on that, me and my buddies try to go do. Specifically, there's Mount Russell that's up there that we want to go check out. Recently, a pretty cool line was opened up on it, and it looks like it would be a pretty fun like adventure, off the beaten path. But where it is in that range is like probably the worst weather in the whole range. So the last couple times I've tried to go up there, I ended up just sitting around and not being able to fly in. But that's kind of how it works.
Hanging out in Talkeetna?
Yeah. Well, this time I learned that I can just hang out in Seattle.
Just wait.
Yeah. I was like, I don't know why I'm sitting here in an airplane hangar. I could literally I could just be watching the weather at home and get on the plane if it looks like it looks good.
It is true. You can get up there pretty quickly. Another question related to progression that I get often is, people want, like guided trips aren't always accessible to everyone, right? They're expensive and maybe you can only do one a year. So what are other resources like clubs or community resources in Seattle, certainly, but even in other parts of the US that you think are really high quality that can help people start to learn their skills and build some confidence?
In the US, we have a really like strong tradition in the climbing world of like mentorship, So oftentimes people get into climbing by like they find their mentor, the person who's a little bit more experienced that they're learning from and climbing with. And yeah, like you said, there are some like clubs that have like basically organized themselves around that principle, right? Up here, the oldest one that we have is like the Mountaineers. That's like long tradition of like this club you can join. You can take all these classes. You can like graduate from the classes, eventually become like a teacher there. They really are about like bringing in the community and teaching people and building their skills. A similar one would be like the Mazamas down in Oregon. They have the same thing. But honestly, I've seen like a lot of different groups and clubs like pop up over time. So like even this group OSAT, one step at
I
a
see them.
yeah, they're like a sober climbing club,
Yeah.
and then there's like I think there's all other kind of like affinity groups that
Mm-hmm.
you can join, and so like seeing those clubs kind of start popping up, I think it's really cool that that's like that infrastructure is there to support people if they want to go get into it. Yeah, the only thing that I'd say about that is like just make sure that you're like learning from someone who is responsible and knows the right things. So I think a lot of times I see people will do a combination of like intro course with a guide just to like get their basics, and then they just take off from there and they go climb with their friends or join a club or something like that, and they'll never hire a guide again, and that's like totally fine. That's what we're here for. So
a lot of what we do at Mountain Madness is custom, and I think that's what keeps things fun and interesting for us. So if people often will call us or email us and say, I have this experience and I want to get to this point. Can you put together some sort of, 3 days of climbing in the Cascades in order for me to build those skills? And those are really good ways to have dedicated one-on-one time with a guide where I think you really learn quickly, and you're, because it's just you and a guide, you get to practice the skill until you really nail it, which is a great way to learn too.
Absolutely. I think that's like a really good way to go. And sometimes, people will talk a little bit about, the price tag of like hiring a guide. And I also sometimes will like spin it this way a little bit to them, and I'd be like, think about the number of hours you're going to spend trying to figure this out on your own, how long that's going to take you. And like, then think about, what do you get paid at your job hourly, like you might actually end up saving time. And if time is money, it might actually be a little bit cheaper if you kind of calculate it out that way. So I do think it's valuable to kind of like get a baseline from someone that has everything dialed, thinks about teaching as like a craft and is professional about it, and is going to be able to give you like the best information. And then like, I mean, from there, it's like you can go wherever you want, and you can continue to build and continue to learn and grow, and share your knowledge one day with people. So
which is really what it's all about. Speaking of that, any other success stories that are special to you, like people who maybe struggled and eventually progressed, or like things that have students or guests that have really stuck with you?
I think my second trip at Mountain Madness, I think about that trip all the time. It was these two Japanese guys, and they like really didn't speak much English. So we were like communicating like very, primitively, right? Because like I didn't speak any Japanese, so there was definite language barrier there. But it was like really fun because we like, we were like laughing, we'd like make jokes, you realize how much of communication is like not really in language anyway, in the actual words. And I just remember it because, one guy was 82 and the other guy was 73. And the 82-year-old was just going up to base camp, and he wanted the 73-year-old to go Summit Baker, go for it. And I remember we were going up the head wall, the Roman head wall at the top, and we were like passing these other groups, and the guy was just like so excited. He would turn around to everybody and be like, "How old are you?" They'd be like, "I'm 25, and I'm 73 years old." He's like yelling at these folks. And
that is so awesome.
And everyone was like, "Yeah, go for it." And so it was just a really like memorable trip. And like, at the time I was like, maybe this is what guiding at Mountain Madness is, it was just
that's great.
A very, very memorable trip. But yeah, we got to the summit, and I remember he got so excited, and then just wanted to drink Canadian Club whiskey down at base camp after. And we did our best to like talk to each other with the limited amount of language we shared.
That's a great story. I mean, I wonder too, like, I imagine it's a much richer memory and story almost because you didn't share language, right? Because you were like more committed to communicating, because you had to be more present and focused in order to communicate.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it was
great.
Yeah, it was a totally memorable trip, and I'll never forget it.
That's awesome. What about with Yeti? And I want to talk a little bit more about Yeti too. And maybe we'll
Yeah,
start with that. Like, tell us. So we talked a little bit at the high level about what Yeti's about, but why is it
yeah.
special to you?
Like, you said in the intro, we're like devoted to providing like free, accessible outdoor adventures for public school kids in South King County. And there's a number of like different studies that have been done, just like measuring things like young people that, getting enough exercise, or young people spending enough time outside, or
Mm-hmm.
young people most exposed to gun violence, young people, that might experience housing or food insecurity. And,
Mm-hmm.
if you really like laid all those studies on the map, you would find like a big hole or big mark, like right in South King County. It's just an
Okay.
area that just traditionally does not get the like services that they really need. And so that's like why we're kind of based there, is because it's just what we call like a recreation desert. There's not a lot of opportunity for people to spend time outside. And sometimes for kids, it's just something as simple as like, well, I don't like, the bus line doesn't get there, I don't have a car, like I don't know
Right.
how to ride.
Yeah.
And so, if we can show up to school with a van and a bunch of gear that they can borrow, and like, our philosophy is a kid should be able to like show up or a snowshoeing day with
Mm-hmm.
like shorts, flip flops, and a cotton t-shirt, and we could still get that kid out the door to go
That's
snowshoeing,
impressive. That's
right?
awesome.
Because that's how kids show up to school. Like it's a lot of pajama pants.
Like, I have to drive by school on my way home from work, and like I made that observation. And when I was in school, I would like, it was a big deal to look nice at school. And now it just seems like, yeah, like Uggs and sweatpants.
Yep, exactly. So that's like what our mission is. And like I think what's unique about our program is that we partner with the schools, and we do it during the school year,
Mm-hmm.
because I think there's a lot of programs out there that might have like scholarships for a backpacking expedition, or like even affinity groups for like some kind of big adventure in summer or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I've worked for programs like that. And, that's a lot of times what I see is like you're like plucking kids out of their lives. You're like giving them this wild experience in the outdoors. And
Mm-hmm.
then you're going like, see you later.
See you
Hope
later.
you have fun. Right. And there isn't really a pathway to like make those experiences like a habit for them, or
Right.
make it like something that is theirs. That's like something they did with you, but it's not something that they're doing for themselves. And
Yeah.
so that's what Yeti really is about, is like we, speaking of the progression, like we aim to have students like basically time with us for when they start, is that they get their like first experience like at school. It's in a classroom or at the field behind the
Mm-hmm.
school on campus, and you're like tying figure eight knots, and you're like, that's your first experience with Yeti. And then your next experience is somewhere that you could take your family that weekend. So like a local park, it should be 10, 15 minutes away from your school and in your neighborhood close to your house. So we're lucky to have a lot of parks in
Mm-hmm.
Washington. That's just like an ethic that we hold here.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, we'll take students, down to the local park, and then they'll, maybe go kayaking or biking, or we'll learn how to geocache, use a map and compass,
Cool.
Yeah. And so that's like that kind of local experience. And then from there, something in the I-90 corridor, an hour or more away, maybe up at Snoqualmie Pass, something like that. And then eventually, we kind of build to something like an expedition style trip. Like last year we had some high schoolers, go attempt Mount Adams. And this year we've got some high schoolers who are going to attempt Mount Baker. And, the idea is that we're not just kind of doing that like one shot with them and then saying, wasn't that cool? Hope you liked it. Like the
Right.
idea is that we're there so that we can be along with them for the journey.
Yeah. I love that you take that approach, because I think so often it can be a very memorable experience, but it doesn't build on itself or create a habit.
Yeah.
And then it's a little bit wasted, right? You haven't really like had as big of an impact as you could if you layer things and get them to really think differently about being outside.
Yeah. I think it doesn't always break down that like really big barrier, which is the mental one, where it's like the outdoors are for me,
Yeah.
like maybe I went on that trip because this group like brought me on that trip, but that's like their thing that they were showing me.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's not my thing that I'm
Mm-hmm.
doing. That's what we really set out to do. And like the public school system is such a resource hub for young people. It's like that's where their friends are, that's where like the most adults that care about them are in their lives, right?
Sure.
That's where they get their education, that's where they might get their mental health, that's where they might also receive like at least one of their meals. they really get a lot from school. And so we just wanted to make like, this is also where you get your passion for the outdoors. Like you just come to school and this is something that like, we're going to be there for you.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Thanks for doing that. We'll put the link to Yeti in the show notes. And if, people want to learn more or donate or support in some way, we'd love that.
Yeah, that would be awesome because we did lose some state funding with the recent budget passing. So any support that we can get, totally appreciate.
Great. Well, let's wrap up with a few sort of like fun questions. What is your favorite piece of gear right now that you have to have with you? You wouldn't leave without it.
Favorite piece of gear that I wouldn't leave without? I think the Petzl Irvis hybrid crampons.
Okay.
Yeah, they're I've been really enjoying them. They have like a Dyneema string that attaches them.
Yeah, I have the snow leopards, but there's different.
Yeah.
So yours, explain what they are.
Yeah, so the front piece is basically the Irvis crampons that they have. The front piece is steel and the heel piece is aluminum, and then they're attached by like Dyneema string, so they pack down really well and they're really light. And I think what I like about them the most is that like you can still get like enough of a kick like with the steel front piece, but you still get the lightness of like the aluminum heel piece. When the glaciers like get a little like icier and it gets like harder, then I'll switch to a burlier crampon for sure.
Yeah.
But man, those have been getting the job done for me for the last
few years. They're pretty amazing. What's your tip though? One problem I have is that sometimes they get all wonky. Yeah. Because there's not a piece of steel connecting the front plate to the heel plate. Yeah. So do you have a funky lacing system you use to keep them? No.
No, I just I get them as tight as I can on a boot, and then I let them sit overnight when they're new, and just let them sit for a while. And then I go in and you tighten them again because that Dyneema like stretches a little bit for some reason.
Okay.
I think it just like catches and settles. And so I literally will just tighten it and then put it back on and let it sit. And sometimes I'll tighten it like 2 or 3 times before it like actually feels like it's on there. But definitely the key with them also is having the full shank boot. You definitely.
Yeah, you kind of have to have one. I've tried to wear them with tennis shoes before. It didn't really.
Yeah, I have too. Mixed success. Yeah. So.
Okay, my last question, because this is really why we climb mountains. What is your favorite snack?
Yeah, favorite snack. That changes all the time, but I do love anything in a tortilla. So I'm almost always going to have wraps of some kind in a tortilla. That's just like my go-to. And one time I had like an 8-day trip, but it was pretty technical climbing. So we didn't want to like go too heavy with the food. So I just had like an assortment of different types of salami and cheese wraps. So it was like, well, like this one is like cheddar and peppered salami. And it's like, oh, this one is mozzarella and pepperoni, and this one is like a little pesto is in there too. And so it was just like just a little, what do they call it? Charcuterie board, but just like in a tortilla.
Do you do sweet too? Like, do you put some peanut butter and Nutella in there, or honey and peanut? No, just savory. No. Okay.
Yeah, I'm not a big sweet guy, and if I am, it's like sour candy. So like Sour Patch Kids, the gummy worms. Yeah, those are my like sweet things that I take on the mountain. I'm not a big like chocolate on the mountain guy.
More for me.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much, Sean. Is there anything else you want to share before we wrap up?
No, this is great. Cool. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, it's been fun. Well, thank you. I think you shared a lot of useful tips that people can incorporate with what they're already doing and learning in the mountains. So thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thank you.